She was born in 2020 during the pandemic. She developed properly, was wonderful, just a joyous little girl. Just shortly before she turned 2 is when we noticed that she was having hair loss. And it was totally out of the blue. So she was just about 3 months prior to turning 2 that we noticed that something was off with her scalp. And once we noticed that it was happening, it went from 0 to 60. It was like, oh, we're noticing a little bit of thinning in your hair. And then within, I'd say literally 4 to 6 weeks, she was 75% bald.
This channel is about patients sharing their stories in healing. Oftentimes, people are frustrated with not finding the right answers when it comes to their health. So I created this channel so that I can share patient stories with you. And maybe it'll resonate with someone. Maybe you'll learn the path that they took to healing. And this might help you in your own journeys. Welcome to another episode of Healing Journeys. I'm Dr. Jyoti Patel, and today we have a very special guest. We have Rachel, who is the mother of Addison, and was a patient of mine, and she has a beautiful story to tell. So welcome to the show, Rachel.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So Rachel, let's talk a little bit about your daughter, Addison. Let's start with when she was completely healthy and everything was fine. Can you start by telling us a little bit about her story?
Sure. So we call her Addy. So I'll be calling her that throughout this. She was born in 2020 during the pandemic. So was, um, quarantined or not going out much as a baby. But, we thought that was a blessing in disguise. She was, a great sleeper on wonderful schedules and all those things. But of course not, getting out into the world and being exposed to certain things and whatnot. But again, we didn't really think much of it. And she developed properly, was wonderful, just a joyous little girl. And then just shortly before she turned 2, so probably about 3 months or so before she turned 2, is when we noticed that she was having hair loss. And it was totally out of the blue. She seemed completely healthy otherwise. She couldn't, talk or anything like that. So she wasn't telling us anything was wrong or acting like anything was wrong. But her daycare is actually who kind of noticed it at first. And we didn't even notice it right away. And then, so she was just about 3 months prior to turning 2 that we noticed that something was off with her scalp.
So that must have been really hard. It sounds like life was so beautiful during COVID, and then something happened which shifted that.
Yeah, it was hard. She's my only child, my first only, and I had no idea, what was going on. I'd never really heard of infant hair loss. I guess she wasn't an infant, and once we noticed that it was happening, it went from 0 to 60. It was like, oh, we're noticing a little bit of thinning in your hair. And then within, I'd say literally 4 to 6 weeks, she was 75% bald. So it was such a whirlwind because you're managing your emotions, but trying to figure out what's going on. Trying to stop it, but you can't because you need time to figure out what the deal is. So yeah, it was very, very hard. I was not okay.
Yeah.
To say the least.
It does sound hard. If you have a condition and it takes a while to build up, sometimes you have time to get used to it. And it sounds like you guys didn't have a lot of time to get used to this disease manifesting.
Exactly. Yep, exactly.
So what were your next steps? You found that her hair was falling out rapidly. What did you do next?
So we first scheduled her appointment with her pediatrician, took her in. They were concerned, which kind of stinks. You always think oh, I'm just a crazy mom. You're be like, oh, it's ringworm or, something super, that's not a great thing, but easy to treat. But she automatically was pretty concerned about it and ordered labs because hair loss can be associated with thyroid issues, I think was what she was looking for mainly. And then also testing her ANA, so her autoimmunities. Still not really sure exactly how that shows up. So we got her in immediately to, lab. I had a almost 2-year-old, and she took the blood draw much better than I did. She did great. And the results came back fairly quickly and everything was normal. The only thing that came up on that initial lab was a slightly low iron deficiency, but nothing you would really notice if you weren't looking. Um, so that crushed me. I wanted to see something in the labs just to make all of this make sense. So from there, they referred us to a dermatologist. So we went to Phoenix Children's and had her seen there by one of the physician assistant dermatologists. She was she acted fairly stumped, which was kind of surprising. They mentioned alopecia areata, but they also thought it wasn't presenting totally classic. So thought it could be telogen effluvium, or they did test her for the ring. I think it's called ringworm.
Yep.
Anyway, and they were like, come back in 30 days. And Mama Bear was like, no, not waiting 30 days. So I called the pediatrician and I asked for a second opinion. And that's when she sent us to our current dermatologist. And we saw him about 2 weeks after that initial derm appointment. And, he saw a different child than the first doctor did, because just within those 2 weeks, she had lost significantly more hair. Pretty much one look at her and made the diagnosis of alopecia areata.
Let's talk about that emotional situation that we all as parents can imagine, but never have to go through what you did.
Yeah, it was so hard. I mean, all the while as we'd been waiting for appointments and, getting the blood work, of course, I'm Googling my heart out. What mom would it be? Oh my gosh, I hope I don't cry here. And, alopecia was like the last thing I wanted her to be diagnosed with, because everything else that I had sort of read about hair loss, especially in kids, was fairly treatable, like not lifelong, just like a stint, right? And I knew with alopecia, it was an autoimmune condition and something that would be a part of her life forever if that was her diagnosis. And so, I mean, I can vividly, my mom was with me at the appointment, and I can literally picture his face telling me the diagnosis. And I mean, I lost it. Luckily, Addy was at an age where she wasn't really that in tune with my emotions now. Different story. So she was just like, whatever. But yeah, it was devastating. And I know that I always feel bad talking about how devastating it was, because I know there's so many other things out there that are so much worse. And a lot of people say with alopecia, it's just hair. And to an extent it is. So I feel bad saying it, but as a mom, anything wrong with your children is just so heartbreaking. And I was very upset.
I think every mom can relate to that. I mean, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. The gravity of the situation isn't the issue. The fact that we want the best for our children and we
Mm-hmm.
want them to be healthy and happy and, stress free, that's what we all hope for. So the loss of that was
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
grieving. Yeah.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So then what happened? What's next after the dermatologist diagnosed
Sure.
Abby?
So he prescribed her a couple of topical ointments for her scalp. And then he also suggested we try putting her on a sort of low dose pulse steroid treatment, basically saying, I mean, he explained about the condition, obviously, and kind of talked about how there weren't really good options for treatment for kids at all. At that point, there weren't any FDA medications approved for alopecia at all anyway. And so he said, the best way to sort of stop her inflammation that's causing her body's immune system to attack her hair follicles, is to put her on a steroid that, just like you told me, puts out the fire. And we were really struggling with that decision. She was so young and steroids are so harsh. And, we know some pharmacists who were like, oh, don't do it, but I'm also watching my 2-year-old lose all of her, hair. So we did decide to do it, and we put her on the steroid. We started using the topicals, and, he had said initially that she should be on the steroid for 3 to 6 months. So we were prepared to kind of give it the 3 and see. And so that's kind of how we started.
And so then, did you feel like there were more things that you needed to do for Addie at this point?
Yes.
Tell me
So
about
after that, I had, by that time, I had joined a few Facebook's support groups for alopecia, and I'd read a lot about the success of these medications that he had put Addy on, and most of them said that they're temporary. It's a Band-Aid to kind of cover a long-term problem that's more systemic inside than, this like scalp skin issue. I'd read a lot about that. So while I was excited to get her going on something, like to do something, you just want to do something. You want to feel in control. And so I knew that going into these medications that this wasn't going to be something that was going to just like make it go away. So my mom and I go to Hawaii every year as just like a mother-daughter trip. And we were scheduled to go like kind of right during that time. And I didn't really want to go, which is crazy, right? Because I just thought, how can I go on this fun trip while my daughter's at home, like losing her hair? But my mom convinced me to go. And I spent the entire week in Hawaii researching everything I could about alopecia and hair loss and autoimmune issues and all the things. And the majority of what I read talked about how, everything that reflects on the outside is typically related to something going on in the inside. And as I read more and more about that and thought more and more about Addy's lifestyle and her picky eating and, the sweets and just, sleep training, right? All the things that could be stressing her out, it just kind of clicked that there was more to this than, slapping on some Rogaine.
I'm so glad that you did that. And Rachel, you're talking to an audience that needs to hear that when you feel hopeless, when you feel helpless, when you feel like maybe you don't have control over the situation, that there is actually something that you can do. And there are places that you can gather information and support groups where other people might have learned different things that can help them, that might help you. And not
100%.
only that, but look at the bigger picture of what the terrain was. The terrain is what caused a change in her body, her
Mm-hmm.
diet, her stress levels, her sleep practices, her environment. And just really looking at that bigger picture gave you hope.
Definitely. Yeah. My mom wasn't happy. She's like trying to have fun on vacation, and I've got my nose in a book the whole time, but that was okay. At least I wasn't crying.
Oh, well, at least you were doing it in a beautiful place.
Exactly.
So when you came back home and you had all this information now, what was the next step?
So we immediately were like, we got to get her in with a functional medicine doctor as soon as possible. I had kind of wished I'd just done it when I was in Hawaii, but I didn't. So we got back. My husband and I both got on the computer and started researching for doctors like you in our area. I think we had like 2 consultations over the phone. And we talked to you guys and immediately were ready to come in and start the process. So we got to work immediately when I got back.
What did you realize needed to change for Addie's health to improve?
I think maybe just being conscious of it. I mean, I obviously like I was conscious of her health, right? I'm her mom. I'm taking care of her. She's well cared for. But I don't know. I wasn't really thinking about like long-term implications of some of her picky eating or long-term implications of some of the types of products we were using around the house, things like that. You just kind of do. And I think a lot, and even like other moms, right, when you're a new mom with a picky eater, for example, they're like, oh my gosh, all kids are picky, like she'll grow out of it, don't worry, as long as she's eating, as long as she's on her growth curve and all those things. And so that's kind of how I went about it. I didn't, I kind of like just relied on the pediatrician, and Addy was always on her growth curves. She always had like glowing reviews at all of her like monthly checkups, and so I thought, okay, like she'll learn how to eat vegetables at some point, right? And I think for a lot of kids that's probably true, right? They can just grow out of it and it doesn't affect them. But not knowing what we were dealing with in terms of her autoimmune condition, we weren't paying attention to those things like we probably should have been.
So paying attention, that's a big deal, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the end, the other thing too, that my mom and I realized, like, as we're like kind of thinking back once we've read through all this, is like, she always had that, like, like little babies have like that Buddha belly, right? They always have that like little belly. She had one as a baby. They all do. But she by now was like almost 2, and she still had that. And we had never really thought about it, even though like I said, in retrospect, we're thinking about like her friends at daycare and like looking at them and thinking like they've kind of grown out of that, you know, but with Addie, like it was still there. It was very pronounced. And again, I just thought, oh, it's her baby belly, but it was 100% bloat. Like she was, girlfriend was bloated. And I didn't know. It's so hard with that age. I feel like, I mean, and anyway, so
It was tough. You had a toddler, you had a 2-year-old who was a picky eater. You were getting messages from your pediatrician that everything was fine. And so it was hard to know that something was not fine on the inside.
yes.
So
Uh-huh.
now you started this functional medicine journey to help Addie with her alopecia.
Mhm.
What kinds of things did you have to change?
So we went through all the recommended testing. So we had her tested. I mean, I'm not even going to list them all off, but so many tests. And I think what came out of those tests that was the most compelling were her food sensitivities. She had many, including dairy and gluten, which is what toddlers live on. And so that was like, whoa, that's got to be making a difference here. She also tested for heavy metals, kind of high. And we were trying to do the mold toxicity test, but we couldn't because she wasn't potty trained. But basically, the test came back with lots of food insensitivities. She had leaky gut, gut dysbiosis. I think that might be the same thing, but her gut was just a mess, essentially. And so we implemented a dairy free, gluten free diet, which was very difficult, as you can imagine. We tried to limit processed foods as much as possible. I wouldn't say we fully eliminated them. It was just, too very difficult, but we did try to, limit them as much as possible. When we put her on quite a few supplements as well, because, she wasn't going to start eating broccoli and kale and smoothies like overnight. Quite honestly, she still struggles with a lot of that. So we, did a lot of research to find like the best multivitamins to put her on, the best pre and probiotics to get her going with. We got her iron was deficient. So we got her on those iron supplements. Our goal the whole time was to try to get off of those and get those nutrients and such through her diet. Again, I know I keep blaming a lot of this on her age, but anyone who has a 2 or 3 year old probably knows that it doesn't happen overnight. It's a big process. And so we did rely on supplements for a while we worked on her diet. And then the other thing that I did was I tried to detoxify our home as much as possible. So I switched cleaning products. I switched to like more natural stuff. I switched like all of her bottles. She was still drinking out of a bottle. I switched them to like glass bottles. I tried to just eliminate as much of the toxic load in our home as I could, knowing that when we go outside, like it is what it is. It's hard. You especially someone like me, you want to just be able to control everything, and you really have to remind yourself like you can only control what's in the home. So those were probably the biggest things that we did in the beginning.
No, it's so important that you bring that full picture to people watching because it's not just one thing that causes autoimmunity. It's the entire
Mhm.
environment, right? So it could be
Yes.
the kinds of foods that you're eating that your body doesn't tolerate that triggers your immune system. It could be the imbalances in the gut microbiome. It could be exposure to chemicals and heavy metals in your home and environment. It could be a number of things. So it's not just one piece of it. It requires this sort of comprehensive approach to health.
Yeah.
And then one of the other things that you'd mentioned early on is stress. So let's talk a little bit about how that also can be a trigger for the immune system.
I learned that, because you're and that's actually funny because, when you tell people about hair loss, they often will say, like, oh, it's stress, especially for like grown-ups, right? Like, oh, you're stressed. You need to take a break. And so when I would tell people before we had her diagnosis that she was losing hair, they say, oh, she's stressed. And you think to yourself, like, she's too. Like, she doesn't know what stress is. Like, what are you talking about? That was 100% my response. But we learned that while, like, she may not consciously know what stress is or, like, be able to realize, like, oh, I'm feeling a certain type of way, like, her body knows, right? It just reacts to certain situations by, trying to fight off whatever feelings and emotions and whatnot that she is going through. And so we worked so hard on just teaching her to regulate her emotions as much as possible. We made her this like really, I'm it's attached to the wall or I'd go get it. This cool like chart that we put in her room that showed like she could point to how she was feeling. And it had happy on there too, right? Like it had all the emotions on it, still does. And then we would point to an activity she could do to feel better. So she'd say, I'm feeling sad. And she'd point to the sad face. And then I'd say, well, what can we do to feel better? And there were all kinds of choices like push against the wall, run around the house, have a hug. She always chose either a big hug or to be wrapped up in a blanket. Those are always her choices. But it was so cool. It worked so well. And honestly, like now at 3, she's 3 now, she knows how she feels and she will tell you. I mean, she is a kid that can identify her emotions more than anyone I know. Granted, I'm like that, so she's probably getting some of that from me, but it's cool because she learned a lot in the process. And now, I mean, look, she's still a toddler. She has her tantrums. She's has meltdowns, but she can regulate them and get back to feeling better very quickly. And I'm not kidding. Like she really can. It's been a work in progress, but it's pretty impressive, in my opinion.
What great lessons for a young child to learn for the rest of her life. I
Yeah,
mean, there's a lot of adults that can't emotionally regulate
for
and
sure.
don't even appreciate that they're in stress mode and that they're
Hmm.
reactive. For Addie to learn these lessons at 2, you've done her a great service. Good
Thank
mommy. Good
you.
mommy.
Thank you.
So when did you start to see things turn around?
Well, so let's see. So probably we had seen a slowdown in the shedding probably about a month, 6 weeks to a month after we started her on her steroid medication, which is to be expected, super aggressive. And that was exciting. But the point of that was more to stop the shedding rather than start the regrowth. And so we started to see a lack of shedding. And then almost immediately, and I'm not kidding, we started to see regrowth once we had changed up her environment, got her on a different diet. I mean, her tummy went down within like a week and the regrowth started. And we ended up, and it went fast. I mean, it was crazy how quickly it started to regrow once it decided to start. And so we actually were able to get her off the steroid after only 2 months when the initial plan was 3 to 6, emphasis on the 6. The 3 was more us saying, okay, that's like the trial we'll give it, But we took her off after just 2 months, and that hair kept growing, and she kept thriving. So it was pretty cool. It was really cool.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Isn't it feel good to know that we're not in a permanent state of illness, that
Yes.
the body has the ability to repair itself?
Hmm.
And that,
Absolutely.
yeah, and you guys did the right thing by her, and I know how much hard work it was, and I congratulate you on putting all that effort in, and and helping your daughter thrive. Now, health is not a straight line though, Rachel. Oftentimes we have these wins, and then sometimes we have some setbacks. Tell me a little bit about whether you experienced that.
Yeah. So all of that regrowth that I just mentioned was happening kind of in like May, June, July, kept going throughout the year. This was last year. And in flu season came, and that was late November. She got super sick. She ended up being diagnosed with strep and was like the sickest she's ever been in her short life. Probably within 3 or 4 weeks after that, we noticed spots popping up on her head. And man, it sucked. You just, the thing about hair, this particular disease is you can grow, hair takes so long to grow, but you can lose it like that. And that was the hardest part for me, was just knowing, like, because it wasn't a lot at first, it wasn't a lot total actually either, but it was so scary because I knew how quickly it can go, that as soon as I saw just one like dime sized spot, it was just like, oh my gosh, trying not to panic. But we immediately, like, this time was so different because we knew what to do, and we just jumped right back. We'd gotten lax, right? Like, she'd been on this diet for almost a year at that point. It's the holidays, right? Like, we weren't as strict about some of the stuff that we'd been really diligent on over the summer and earlier in the year. And so we just immediately went into tighten it up mode. We came in immediately to talk to you. We came and we immediately went to the dermatologist as well. Just, we've always kind of looked at this as like a whole team approach to her. I think we even took her to her pediatrician. Like we were like, okay, like let's all get our heads back together and see what we can do. And it was pretty cool. Like, I mean, obviously not cool that she had this relapse, but this time with it, it seemed like I guess this was like a year ago now, but it was almost like it was growing in like as fast as it was falling out. Like she was never like the first time. I mean, she had a complete bald like cap, and this time like you never really would have known if you didn't know, because it was, like I said, kind of coming in as it was going out. So that was a relief, and it was also kind of a moment where I had to, as a mom, like come to terms with the fact that like this isn't over, and this will probably never be over. I hadn't really let myself go there before the relapse. I just wanted to think like it was a total fluke, like we're okay, like we're moving forward. This is never going to happen again. And for some people it doesn't. But that happening, I think for my like mental health surrounding her disease was almost good, because it it solidified what we're really dealing with here. It's a long-term thing, and we've got to take it seriously forever.
What's the forever look like?
I can't wait until she's old enough to like kind of have a say in all of this. I know that's not a great thing. I don't want to like put it on her. Of course, I'll always be her supporter, number one supporter, and I'll help her through everything. But it's hard as a parent to make these big decisions for your kid. We did do about another round of steroids to sort of jumpstart her system again. I don't know if that was the right thing to do. If she could make that choice, I don't know if she'd want to do that. I actually went to a conference for alopecia areata in July, hosted by the National Alopecia Areata Foundation. And, there were lots of people there who have just totally embraced their alopecia, and they're such an inspiration. It was really cool to see. And a lot of them are teenagers or early adults, and they've said like, just let your kid live. Like, this isn't, it's just hair. Like, I love my life. I'm confident. It's taught me so much about confidence. And, it's not fair to kids to like not let them have the birthday cake or the pizza or the whatever. And so it's like, you're right, and we do let her have those things when it's a special occasion, but it'll just be cool when she can sort of decide like what she wants to do. And if she wants to embrace it and say, you know what, like, I don't want to be this strict and we're just going to see what happens, like, I will totally let her do that, of course. But as a mom, I'm just trying to do what I think is best. And I know that through all of my research and all of our conversations, like, it isn't just hair. Something is going on inside of her that's causing inflammation. Nobody wants their bodies to be inflamed. So I'm doing what I can to reduce that for her. And if she decides on something else later on, like, that will be her decision.
It's
That's
beautiful.
hard.
No, it's a parent's journey that you're describing. We want the best for our children, but at some point we need to let go of the reins and give them control over their choices and
Yeah,
learn when they don't feel good and when they do feel good,
exactly.
and the
Yeah.
choices that they're making. So
Yeah,
yeah,
because she'll know. I mean, I don't know if like if she feels great when she doesn't eat any gluten. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't make a difference to how she feels. Maybe it makes all the difference. So it'll be really cool once she can be able to articulate those things and make those big choices herself.
yeah. So going forward, what would you tell a parent that might be just dealing with this for the first time, dealing with a child with an autoimmune disease? What would you tell them?
I think the first thing that I would tell them is, people are going to tell you that it could be so much worse. That is what people are going to tell you. And they're right. But for you, this is your worst right now. And it's okay to be devastated. And it's okay to feel sad and cry and think that it's horrible, even though, of course, it could be worse. I think that for me was something like, I had to start therapy, if I'm being quite honest, because people around me just didn't understand. But your feelings are valid, I guess, would be the first thing I would say. And then I would say, like, choose what you want to do, choose your path, whether it be, Western medicine, functional medicine, do nothing. That's your choice, and try not to let other people influence that decision. I know some people whose children got alopecia and they just decided to let it run its course, and they've seen regrowth, right? Like everyone's decision is their own. And so I would say, you know, figure out what you want to do and do that. And when you've decided what you want to do, like become an expert, advocate for your child, advocate for yourself, um, do the research, do the things. It's hard, it's a lot of work, but if you've decided that you want to attack it in whatever way that is, you're going to have to sort of quarterback that effort, and it'll be worth it. And then I also would say too, at the end of the day, like just see your kid for who they are. I mean, I have to remind myself that sometimes when maybe I'm noticing like she has one little spot right now in the back, and if I'm like fixating on it, I'll have to just look at her and see her and say, this kid is so awesome, and this doesn't matter. Like it does, but like holy cow, like this is my person. I love her so much and we got this. So sometimes just really try to look past it. I mean, I know there were times when I'd be like so devastated and I'd just turn on like Celine Dion and pick up Addy and just dance around the house to just remember that like we've only got so much time, and I want to spend it, yes, focusing on her health, but also just enjoying her for everything she is.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your story and Addie's story.
My pleasure.
And I thank you all for joining us today. Join us next week for another episode on Healing Journeys.